All right, let's talk about materials inside Maya. Um, when you're using Maya, typically there's Arnold is what you're going to be rendering with. There's other ones available, but Arnold is the one that we are currently using. When you use materials for Arnold, you want to use lights for Arnold as well. So just so you can see what all of these things are going to do, I'm just going to grab everything in my scene. Let me delete all my other lights out. Grab everything in my scene. I'm going to hold down the space bar to get to the lighting and shading. I'm going to assign existing, and I'm just going to go back to the default Lambert. And this is just the default coloring that comes into Maya. Lambert 1 we never ever touch. If I just go to Arnold render right now, we should get blackness because there's no lights in the scene, so there's no light, it's just dark. If I let me switch to a different camera angle so we can see this maybe a little bit different angle. So if I go in here and I start adding lights, I'm going to add an area light. I'm going to make it bigger. Okay, this will have a little peg sticking out. That peg controls which way the area light is facing. So I'm going to angle it like this. Hit the play button. And still we're seeing nothing, even though we have a light in our scene. I'm also going to go into my render settings and just turn this down real quick. Anytime you do lighting or texturing, it's always good to have your render settings down. Okay, so we get nothing. Typically the area light is really dim. So I'm going to hit Control A. I'm going to take the intensity up to a crazy amount, like 10,000. We'll go back to that Arnold render. And now we can see definitely this is blown out. So we'll go back to our attribute editor and maybe make this 2,000. Okay, if we keep this play button on, we can just change the value and it will automatically update. So I'll set this to 1,000 and you see it automatically update. Now the area light is, it emulates a real light. So that light will basically be here shining on these objects, which means that stuff that the area light is not hitting are not lit up. So you can see back here there's nothing. There's where the light's coming from. It's typically you're going to see a harsh area here and then it's gradually going to drop off. So you want to be careful with where you put your lights because obviously you don't want to have these big burnt out spots. Okay. And also if we were shooting it from this angle, because the light's not on this side, we really wouldn't see as much as you might think. Like we don't really get as much lighting on this side. It could be used for dramatic lighting or something like that, but in this case, that's what it would do. Some of the attributes you'll find in a lot of these is color, intensity, exposure, color temperature. This is a nice one because it helps you set the tone of your scene. If I set this to, let's say, 2900 and render this, you'll see how we're getting more of this orange tone. And then as I go up further, I'm getting more of a blue tint to it. And so that's going to help make your rendering not look so CG. Because typically lights in the real world are not just always perfectly white. Typically there's a blue or an orange that happens on them. You could also go up here and pick a different color. So if I turn this off and I pick, let's say, pink, I could do that as well. But it's very rare that you would find a light that's pink like that in the real world. This is more emulating real world lighting. Okay. We also have our light shape. So this is set to quad. You can set it to cylinder or disc. And when you see an item like the light reflecting in an object, you'll see that disc shape or that cylinder shape inside of it. Now, just as a warning, sometimes when you change a simple setting, like I change this from rectangle to cylinder, it's now like thinking for an extremely long time and it's going to crash. All right, so Maya crashed and we're back now. So this is what it looks like when it's a cylinder. You can see that the cylinder shape is now rounded here as opposed to before it was just like a flat line. And then if we had reflections on here, we would be able to see that shape inside of that as well. So you can use that. Typically for animations, you really want to keep your lighting as simple as possible, unless again that it's for a specific look or specific reason why you would have that. So to show some of these other options, we'll come back to this in a second. But let's go and just assign a material to this. So I'm just going to make this really big for now so we can see it. And I'm going to go to the hotbox, lighting and shading, and assign new material. Under Arnold, I'm going to go to AI standard surface, which is right here. You'll use this a lot, so it's typically good if you right click on it and say add to favorites. because now under your favorites, under Arnold, there it will be. So I'm just going to go in here and set the metalness up to, let's say, 0.4, just so we can see this a little bit more effectively. So I'm going to go to a different angle. I'm going to render. I'm way too zoomed in. Let's zoom out a bit. There we go. Okay. So we can see the shape of this is definitely a rectangle inside there. If I hit Control A to get my attribute editor open, I go to focus, I go to my area light because that was in my last item selected, click the right tab. Some of the stuff that I can adjust on here. So one of them is roundness. Let's set this to 1. And we'll hit the render button again. And now you can see instead of that being a perfect square, now we're getting this in a more rounded look to it. Let's also go to, I'm going to go to my render settings again, and I think when it crashed, yep, it just didn't reset that. There we go. I'm also going to go to my soft edge and hit 1, and then hit play. And then that's going to soften the edges of that light out. I may have to turn my render settings up just a smidge, so I can see that. Okay, and maybe take the intensity of the light down some. There we go. So now it's at 1000. So here's what it looked like at 0. Here's what it looked like at 1. And 1 is the highest it's going to go. Okay, so that's what those options can be used for. Now you could also say don't normalize, and you'll see it just totally blows the scene out. And that's kind of balancing this intensity. You typically want normalize on. It gives you more realistic lighting. We also have things like cast shadows. I can tell a light not to cast a shadow if I just want to see what that light's going to do. Or I just want to light up a certain part of it. I can also take the shadow density down. So maybe it's not as dim back there. Sometimes when you light stuff, your intensity of the shadows are too dark and it's very difficult to see. I may also want to take my shadow color and give it a slight tint. So maybe something like in the bluish realm here. And this will look a little bit better, a little bit more natural, because typically, again, shadows are not just like black. There's typically a color to your shadows. Okay, so you typically want to have, some sort of tint to your shadows if you're going to be focusing on the rendering part. Again, because this is animation, you don't really have to focus too much on the lighting as long as the animation is good, is well seen. Other things you may want to change. Under the light's visibility, you can turn off the diffuse. So now it's only showing the specular. You can turn off the specular. So now it's only showing the diffuse. That would happen for subsurface scattering, indirect, volume, and so on. None of those we really have in the scene or really would be getting into for what we're doing. Okay. Now let me close these. Stop that. And let's go back under that light menu. And I'm going to pull it out. Any of the tabs, any of the menus at the very top, you can click and it'll pull that out as a menu. So area light is right there. Sky dome is typically a good starting point for most lighting setups. And the reason for that is it basically makes a sphere around your scene that's lighting up the entire thing. And especially for animations where you're just trying to get a good overall lighting setup. You'll see that this is good because it lights everything pretty well. Scoot that over. I'm going to Control A so I can get to my attribute editor. Okay. You'll see some of the same items: color, intensity, resolution, color temperature, and again, you can play with it. Oops. Make sure the play button is clicked. Okay. There's a format here for the kind of sphere it is. We don't need to worry about that right now, but you'll see again the same settings: normalize, cast shadows. Don't need to worry about this too much. If we don't want the sphere to be visible, we can just turn this off, and you'll see that nothing shows up in the background. Now this is good because it actually gives us an alpha channel, so we could actually bring this into After Effects and put our own background back there instead of just having that white background. Okay, now you can also, again, turn off the transmission, turn off the diffuse, turn off the specular, right, and everything will just kind of go away. So you can be very selective about how your lights work on a per light basis. Now, typically, if you're working with a light dome, you may want to go to the color and click the map button, click on File, and then go ahead and find an HDR in your folders. You may have to download one, obviously, to get it into your folders. So this is one that I downloaded before. Now you'll see in your folder, if you have used one that you've used before, there will be an HDR and a TX. Arnold automatically saves whatever files you're using as this TX format, so just don't delete it. You can still leave it there. And what's going to happen is it's going to use that image to do the lighting so that you get more variety of lighting inside your scene versus before we were getting basically one flat color around the entire thing. Okay, so it's much more overall pleasing lighting because it's, again, not the same exact color. And based off of, close that, where this sphere is rotated, I'll pick up different areas of lighting. Okay, so that might be something, again, that I want to include in there and have a good lighting source from one side or the other. So let's just delete that for now. The other ones that are in here, so I'm going to grab these and hit Mesh Light. Okay, and it only does one at a time. I forgot about that. So I'm just hitting each one and hitting Mesh Light. And what that means is that each one of those objects will now be a light. And again, just like the regular lights, we're not seeing it too much, so I'll go to the attribute editor, crank up that intensity, and then render this again. And now you can see it's going to look like that item is actually lighting it up. Now the item itself goes and is like invisible now. I could say show original mesh, and then it pops back in. Same thing here. Crank it up to 1000, show original mesh. Hit the go button. Okay, and now I can see the item and they're glowing and making it look like it's lit up. Okay, and you'll see again those same options we had before. So light to light to light, there's really not a whole lot of difference for what we're doing. These top three are typically the ones you're going to use. The bottom three at the moment, don't worry about. If you really want to get into lighting and stuff, then you can play with some of these. But the top three are going to be great lights to start off with. Typically for a scene, you really want to look at what your lights are going to look like from many angles. Okay, so if I have, in this case here, let's go back to my original file. In this original file, the lighting is just that sky dome, and I'm shooting it from above so that as I look at that scene from way up here, I'm ensuring that I can see all of the stuff, the way that I want it to be seen. If I were to have used an area light in this case, it might light from one side or the other side and not giving me this kind of flat look that I was going for. So you really have to look at what kind of lighting you're trying to go for, what kind of things you're trying to emulate, and go from there. If I was going to aim this from, let's say, down here, and I want to get a good camera angle like this may not be the best lighting setup for this. Okay, I might lose my object here, and so maybe having an area light from above would be a better way to do that. Okay, so always look at where you want your lights to come from, and the best resource for any of that is just looking at different images of lights and models and how they light different things. So here's an image from Kung Fu Panda, and you can see the lighting in this case is very strong on the left, and actually from behind them is where the lighting is coming from to give them this kind of silhouetted look. So they have these shadows in front of them, and obviously it's a very specific, distinct kind of look to it. Here in the minions, the light's coming from the front. You can see the light on the glass here. You can see where their shadows are. You can see, a whole lot of lighting information just based off of, just these still images and then whatever that is. Okay, so you really have to look at what kind of lighting kind of setup you're going to use, because that will help dictate where your lights are going to come from.